Shift types like broken shifts and sleepover shifts are literally the most difficult and most commonly misinterpreted conditions in the SCHADS award. It's the most frequently asked question we get here at PayCat. And so in this third part of our SCHADS award course, we share with you the types of shifts in the SCHADS award and how you should interpret them. This includes broken shifts, sleepover shifts, 24-hour care shifts, excursions, weekend shifts, public holiday shifts, and even recall shifts. Also, make sure you check out our playlist containing the rest of the course. I've left a link in the description box below. And if you work in a business under the SCHADS award and you need to include this as part of your CBD or need a certificate, we have a paid version of the course that will also issue you a certificate when you complete the course. It also includes bonus tools like our SCHADS compliance checklist to help you with processing payroll, and we keep the course 100% updated as changes come through with the SCHADS award. I've also left links to access it below. Let's go. Okay, so first up, we have broken shifts. Employees working in disability services, home care, or aged care often work shifts consisting of multiple periods of work, separated by an unpaid break. These shifts are referred to as broken shifts. So for example, if your employee works from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then comes back on the same day and works from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., that's a broken shift. Broken shifts in the SCHADS award only apply to social and community service employees working in the disability services and home care sector. The total of the broken shifts shouldn't end up being more than 12 hours. If it does end up being more than 12 hours, then you pay double their standard rate. For example, let's say you have an employee that works their first shift from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then takes a break from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then resumes work from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Even though they've only worked 8 hours, the final 2 hours must be paid at double their ordinary rate under the award because the total span of the broken shift exceeds 12 hours from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. We see a lot of employers commonly make the mistake of only paying their staff double the rate if they work more than 12 hours across their broken shifts, but it applies to the span of hours across the broken shifts, not how many hours they work. If the employee works broken shifts on consecutive days, so for example on Monday and Tuesday, they must have a minimum of 10 hours rest break between the end of one of those shifts and the start of the next. And following the conclusion of a 4-year review, Fair Work Commission introduced changes to the SCHADS award from July 2022, 2 of which impacted broken shifts. The first requires employee agreements where there are more than 2 periods of work in the broken shift. In other words, 2 or more unpaid gaps. An agreement must be attained before the shift or as part of the employee's regular pattern of work. The second introduced a new broken shift allowance, which we discussed in the previous module. Next, we have sleepovers. A sleepover is when your employee has to provide home care services overnight at the client's home. It's not necessarily considered to be a 24-hour care shift, so the compliance rules are a little bit different. You'll need to give your employee a separate room with a bed and the necessary facilities like a bathroom and a kitchen or kitchenette if the shift ends up being 8 consecutive hours. They also must get paid a sleepover allowance, which you can refer back to in our previous module. If they are required to perform any specific duties while staying the night, they must be paid a minimum overtime rate of 1 hour. And if they have to work immediately before or after the sleepover, in other words, they don't get no break, then you should pay them for a minimum of 4 hours of work, even if they don't work the entire 4 hours. Calculating pay with sleepover shifts can be complex, so you may want to consider implementing automated payroll software for that. Moving on to 24-hour shifts. Given the nature of the services that home care businesses provide, it's likely that you'll have staff who will need to work 24-hour shifts. Now, if that's the case, there are certain rules you have to follow. Basically, you can only require an employee to work a 24-hour care shift if both parties agree. And if an employee is rostered to work the shift, you must give the employee an opportunity to sleep for a continuous 8 hours during the shift in their own separate bed. They must also have access to facilities such as kitchen and bathroom, along with free board or lodging for each night they sleep over. Clean linen is now also a requirement and will need to be provided in addition to the separate room with a bed and facilities. You would have learned in the previous module that there is also an allowance for this type of shift, so make sure you are paying your staff accordingly. Next on the list of shifts is the excursions. If your employee agrees to take a client on an excursion that involves staying away from home, you must stick to the next couple of rules to meet all your compliance requirements. If the excursion takes place on a weekday, so Monday to Friday, they must get paid for the time they work between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. They shouldn't work more than 10 hours per day, and they must be paid for a sleepover allowance if it's an overnight excursion. The same applies to Saturday and Sunday excursions, but you'll need to make sure that your employee doesn't work for more than 10 days within the 2-week cycle. For weekend work, you need to know that you'll have to pay your staff penalty rate. Penalty rates are higher pay rates that employees need to be paid for working particular hours or days. On Saturdays, you will need to pay your staff 150% of the minimum pay rate, and on Sunday, the penalty rate of 200% of the minimum pay rate. For casual employees, you will need to add their casual loading in addition to the penalty rates. If you have employees who work their shifts on public holidays, you'll need to follow the rules set by the National Employment Standards. The National Employment Standards are 11 minimum employment entitlements that have to be provided to all employees. Public holidays are one of those entitlements. It's important to know when public holidays are because employees can get different entitlements on these days. According to the standards, if you have an employee that works on a public holiday, they must be paid 250% of their ordinary hourly rate.
For example, Mason is a full-time employee in the social and community services sector. He had to work on 3rd of May, which was Labor Day in Queensland. He's classified as a Level 7 employee under the SCHADS award. So his ordinary hourly pay rate is $58.23. On Labor Day though, Mason's hourly rate was 2.5 times that, so he got paid $145.58 per hour instead. Remember, if you have any casual employees working on a public holiday, you'll have to pay them 275% of their ordinary hourly rate, which is 250% for public holidays plus 25% for their casual loading. For example, Mary works for the same company as Mason and all had to work on Labor Day. But she's a casual level 2 employee and her ordinary hourly rate is $41.76. On Labor Day though, Mary's hourly rate was 2.75 times that, so she got paid $114.84 per hour.
Lastly, we have recall shifts. A recall to work simply means that you've been called back to work after your shift has already been completed. Because of the burden and inconvenience of being called back to perform duties, the SCHADS award requires employers to pay an overtime rate. If you recall an employee back to work after they've already left the premises, you'll have to pay them an overtime rate for at least 2 hours, even if they had only performed duties for 30 minutes. They won't have to stay for the entire 2 hours if their duties have been performed, but you have to pay them an overtime rate. The overtime rates for Monday to Saturday work is 150% of the employee's ordinary hourly rate for the first 2 hours and then 200% after that.
So, if Mason were recalled to work on a regular Tuesday, so not a public holiday, after leaving the premises when his shift ended, his employer would need to pay him 1.5 times his ordinary hourly rate, which is $58.23. He was at work for 1.5 hours after being recalled, but his employer must pay him for 2 hours. So Mason must be paid 1.5 times $116.46, which totals to $174.69.
So, those are all the rules around the different shifts. You'll need to make sure that you're staying on top of the shifts your employees are working, especially if they have special requirements. If you don't, you risk having the Fair Work Commission knocking on your door. In the next module, we'll tackle hours of work. See you there.